In 1938, the U.S. Army Air Corps issued requirements for a medium bomber to be built. They wanted one that could fly faster than 300 miles per hour and capable of carrying a bomb load of 3,000 pounds with a range of 2,000 miles. North American Aviation had already privately been working on such a project. With a wingspan of 67 feet 7 inches and two Wright 1,700 horsepower engines, the B-25 was a can-do kind of plane that succeeded in almost every imaginable assignment and came back asking for more. Originally designed for mid-level bombing, the B-25 proved itself as a low-level gunner as well. Twin engines and a twin fin tail, the B-25 arguably the most recognized warplane profile in World War II. It was manufactured with various nose configurations, from multi-machine guns to cannons, but probably the most common would be the glass nose. Starting in 1940, manufacturers built an estimated 10,000 B-25s before the war ended. Many continued in service even after the war ended. But today there are less than 50 of these bombers still flying. Kermit Weeks is one of those committed to keeping the B-25 and their stories alive. Weeks is the creator of Fantasy of Flight, the world's greatest aircraft collection near Orlando, Florida. One of its star attractions is the Apache Princess, one of the 50 still flying. Weeks had his Apache Princess restored to its original condition, right down to the smallest detail. The B-25 did its work in every area of combat in World War II, from England to Australia. The B-25 would drop bombs on oil refineries and train yards to push back the Germans. Even in the U.S., the B-25 earned its keep, watching for enemy submarines in our two oceans and the Gulf of Mexico. This is a salute to the B-25 and the heroes who flew them. In the Pacific, the B-25 bombed shipping, strafe supply lines, and equipment in the Philippines and New Guinea. Apache Princess was part of the 345th Bomb Group known as the Air Apaches. The Air Apaches were the first full Air Force combat group sent to the Pacific in World War II. As a low-level bomber, they would drop 58,000 bombs over Japanese-occupied airfields and installations. Strafing would be the role that the 345th would become famous for. With the damaging of 275 and the sinking of 260 vessels, shipping came to a halt, and soon the Japanese would surrender. The B-25 was a hero in every corner of the world, but to many it was most famous for the Doolittle Tokyo raid. 4 months after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, America was in a daze, angry, growing ever more anxious to respond. But with Japan 4,000 miles away, what could America do? Quite a lot, as it turns out. The military response was a tactical recipe stirred with the imaginative spoon of American ingenuity and the remarkably short takeoff capability of the B-25 Mitchell bomber. Typically, bombers can't take off from aircraft carriers, especially World War II carriers like the USS Hornet, with a tiny 800-foot flight deck. With 16 bombers lined up on the aft deck, this left only a 460-foot runway. But the B-25 was not your typical bomber. With modifications made to the B-25, it was ready for the challenge. The plan was to take off the USS Hornet 400 miles from the Japanese coastline. Unfortunately, they were spotted by a Japanese fishing trawler, and fearing that the trawler had radioed their position, the decision was made to launch 700 miles from shore. The Hornet turned into the wind. Heavy with 2,000 pounds of bombs and all the fuel they could carry, 16 planes took off, with Doolittle in the lead. Later, the world learned of the Doolittle Raiders. The 80 crewmen, pilots, navigators, and bombardiers flew off the carrier knowing that their B-25s did not have enough fuel to return. However, Doolittle's raid succeeded. America got its battle victory against Japan just 4 months after Pearl Harbor. In addition to the considerable physical damage it inflicted, the B-25 raid brought the Japanese their first taste of war. Japan was forced to keep large fleets of fighter aircraft on their home island rather than deploying them forward. Each year, crewmen, sons and daughters, meet to continue the story of the Doolittle raid and other quests of the B-25 bombers and the men who flew them. At the Doolittle meeting in California, Kermit met Roman Otimus. Roman flew the original Apache Princess in World War II, and Kermit was honored in giving him the opportunity of once again sitting at the controls and reliving some of those most memorable experiences. At the Doolittle meeting in South Carolina, he gave Jay Moore that same experience. Jay also flew the original Apache Princess during World War II and shared some of his original log notes and memories with Kermit. Just recently, Kermit flew his Apache Princess to Sun and Fun Fly-In Lakeland, Florida, where it was judged and won Grand Champion World War II Warbird. The Apache Princess is still making bomb runs today, but the ordnance have changed from bombs to watermelons. Here at the Fort Lauderdale Air and Sea Show, thousands of people watched as Kermit released his 1,200 pounds of watermelons, a far cry from yesteryear. Between appearances and watermelon drops, Apache Princess stands proudly at Florida's Fantasy of Flight, one of the many testimonials to the history of aviation, but one that also stands for bravery and the cost of liberty.